My name is Emma, and I'm with the 2Rivers Festival. So thank you for coming to this event. Feel free to turn your camera on or off, but maybe try and mute yourself during the presentation. So the 2Rivers Festival celebrates and appreciates the Speed and Eramosa rivers, and we want to thank Jenny and Kitty from the Arboretum for sharing their passion for our rivers with you. And thanks to all of you for attending this event. The festival is organized and run by volunteers and involves a lot of community organizations. So please also support our advertisers and our event sponsor, the Guelph Outdoor School, who generously make this festival possible. You can see all our advertisers on our website and in our booklet. We have over 40 great events. So please have a look and RSVP to the ones that interest you. We have a couple more until the end of the month. So the project, the 2Rivers Festival, is a project of Wellington Water Watchers, and it's our hope that if we fall in love with the rivers in the city of Guelph, we'll want to further protect them. So we are recording these sessions to share later on YouTube. So if you're comfortable with that or not comfortable with that, yeah, feel free to turn off your video. Please also go to our social media and, follow and like. So on Twitter, it's 2Rivers Festival. On Facebook, it's 2Rivers Festival with the number 2. And you can follow Wellington Water Watchers on Instagram at Wellington Water Watchers. So yeah, I will pass it over to Jenny and Kitty. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, guys. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna do a little bit of a virtual pond study. We have a pre-recorded video that we're gonna share with you guys of a pond study we did in the Arboretum. So definitely feel free to watch along, and at the end of the video, we'll have some time left for a bit of a question and answer period, and we'll try to get to as many questions as you guys have. Hi everybody, my name is Kitty. Behind the camera there, that's Jenny. Hello. And we are the naturalist interns here at the University of Guelph Arboretum. And today we are participating in the 2Rivers Festival to bring to you guys at home a little exploration of our Victoria Woods Pond right here. Now, if you guys are a little bit newer to the Arboretum or you're not quite sure what that word means, I like to think of arboretums as essentially a museum for trees. So we are a big tree garden. We have trees from here that are native to Ontario. We have trees planted here that are from all the way across the world. We have some common trees and some really rare and endangered trees as well. So all sorts of things here. And at the University of Guelph Arboretum in particular, we have lots of manicured gardens, plant collections, stream banks, even a nature reserve, all in this one big beautiful space. So it's really, really wonderful. And one of my favorite places to visit in the University of Guelph Arboretum is this place right here. This is Victoria Woods. And Victoria Woods is one of our old growth forests here, which means this land around us has never been cleared cut. Some of the trees here are over 100 years old, which is pretty spectacular. So I think it goes without saying that we have lots of amazing different habitats here in the Arboretum. And right here in Victoria Woods, one of the best places to look for animals and plants is right here in this big old pond. Now, fresh water ecosystems like this are really, really important to have around because lots of different things depend on it. You'll find species of plants and animals will grow and live around here. Some animals would live their whole lives in the water. Some animals would live their lives maybe partially in the water and then come out later on. Or some animals live on land but will just come and visit to have a little drink or a little bath. So it's a really, really important resource for all of the species that live here. And sometimes these species can be a little bit tricky to find, but sometimes they will leave clues behind for us. So even just looking at the pond right now today, we found a little sign that an animal has been coming here to maybe take a little drink. So if you come on over here, in this muddy area here, we see some animal tracks. So deer, for being such a big animal, they can be kind of sneaky sometimes. We definitely have deer that live here in the Arboretum, white-tailed deer. And today they've left some tracks for us to see right by the water's edge. So you can tell they're deer. It's got two pointed toes, just like this. So that's how you tell this is a deer track versus any other animals. And it looks like it walked right up to the water's edge, probably to have a drink. So even though a deer is not an animal that lives in the water, typically, like you would imagine maybe a frog or a turtle, they do depend really, really heavily on these ecosystems, even to have just a little drink by the waterside, which is a really, really cool thing to see. Even though they are very sneaky, they do leave signs behind, so we can tell they've been here recently, which is really awesome. Now, of course, it's not just animals that we can find around the pond. We have some other plant species that are kind of great to see around this area as well. So why don't we follow me and we could go and show you some of these plant species that we found around today. All right, now you're gonna watch us step here a little bit. But I wanted to show you guys this pretty spectacular looking flower right here. So this is a flower called Jack in the Pulpit. Now this is a pretty funny name for a wildflower, but you can take a look. If you lift up this hooded part here, there's a little spike on the inside. So this is Jack, and he is standing inside what looks like a hooded pulpit structure, so that's why this plant is called Jack in the Pulpit. And this is a really, really funny plant. If you look at it and you're not quite sure what you are looking at, you might even mistake it for maybe a pitcher plant. It looks almost like a pitcher plant, the structure here. But this is a very, very unique structure designed to help this flower. So what happens is Jack here in the middle, this is actually what we call a spadix. And on the spadix at the very base, there's going to be little flowers that form here, right at the base. Now, this modified leafy bit all around it that curls around and has a hood that comes on top here, this is called the spathe. And what happens is this hooded spathe that acts as a little bit of protection to protect the flowers on the inside, and this hooded bit here prevents the whole structure from being covered in rainwater, that which may wash away the pollen from the flowers. But what happens is this plant actually emits a kind of fungal smell, and this fungus smelling thing will attract fungus gnats, which are these tiny little insects. They're called fungus gnats because they like to lay their eggs on fungus. So they're going to come to this plant looking for a place to lay their eggs, except it's going to be deceived because this actually is not a fungus. So it's going to take a little tumble inside of this plant, inside of this pitcher-like structure, and it's actually not going to be able to climb its way out because on the inside of the spathe here, it's really, really slippery, and it can't really fly out because then the hood flops right on top like this. So the fungus gnat is going to be stuck inside this flower, and it's going to have to crawl out of a small opening at the bottom of the spathe. And in doing so, it's going to cover its entire body in pollen before it comes out. And as it gets tricked by going to flower to flower to flower, that's actually how Jack in the Pulpit pollinates itself. It deceives little helpers, little fungus gnats to help do the little pollination work for them. So that's really, really awesome. Now, all around us as well, and all around the Jack in the Pulpit, we want to be a little bit careful because there is some poison ivy around. So there are these plants here. This is poison ivy right here, and you can find them scattered along. So poison ivy, you'll notice they can be very variable, but they usually have these nice pointed leaflets, so 3 leaflets, and they're nice and pointed, and the margins can be very variable among the leaflets. So some of them will be very lobed almost like this. Some of them will have teeth, some of them will be a little bit more smooth. But these leaflets of 3, usually the middle one here is on a slightly longer stem and they're kind of droopy. So that's how you can tell poison ivy apart. And poison ivy, of course, you don't want to touch them because if you do touch them, they actually produce an oil that if you get on the skin, you can react to them. So humans will react to poison ivy and they'll get kind of itchy. And some people may have an even worse reaction as well. But that shouldn't keep you from going outdoors if you're worried, because one of the best things to do is to learn to recognize them and you want to just stay away from them, and that should be totally fine. If you do find yourself accidentally brushing on some poison ivy, you know, just make sure that you wash your skin with some soap and water, and that gets rid of the oil. So hopefully that will prevent you from getting a reaction, or if you get a reaction, then it should pass. If you get a reaction that is a little bit more severe, you could go to your doctor for treatment, but that should be no reason to keep you from the outdoors. Just be aware of where they are and stay clear, and you should be just fine. Now, of course, at this pond study, one of the best things to explore is the area around it, but also the animals inside the pond itself. That's where you find a lot of the biodiversity in a pond ecosystem like this. So I think maybe I'll pass it over to Jenny to tell you a little bit more about that. Yeah, for sure. So, of course, if we want to look at the critters that are hanging out inside the water, then we better get a little bit wet and go exploring in the water a little bit. So you guys want to follow over to where we set up our equipment, I can show you really quick how to conduct a pond study. And it's really not as complicated as it sounds. It's really easy and a really fun way to get to know what's in your ponds. So we're right here by the water's edge, and there's a couple of things that we need for a pond study. So first thing that you need is you want something to hold your water and the things from the pond that you're going to be catching. We at the Arboretum tend to use white bins just because the white gives us a nice clean background to see things on. So it's just a little easier to pick out the different critters. We also use a little net for dipping in a pond and catching little critters. And another optional thing that we really like is an identification guide. So we have here a biodiversity sheet. The Arboretum puts these out. You can order them off our website, but this one is Pond Life in Your Neighborhood. And it has a series of kind of labeled pictures of common invertebrates and vertebrates you may find in the pond. So that's a quick little reference guide for figuring out some of the things you might see around. And it's nice and laminated too, so it's handy and waterproof for the field, so that's nice. But first step of your pond study is you're going to take your bin and you're going to fill it with just a little bit of water. And we'll try to keep it as mud-free as possible, because once things get muddy, it gets really hard to see. All right, so now I have a good little bit of water in my bin. I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to take my net next. And what I'm going to do with my net is I'm going to swish it around on the bottom of the pond where all the muck and leaves and debris is, because that's where most of the critters are hiding. So they're going to be in there. We're going to try and scoop as much as we can. And the trick with this is you want to catch as many critters as possible, but as little mud as possible, because once you dump everything you catch into your bin, that mud might really cloud the water and make it really hard to see. So a neat little trick is after you've kind of scooped around in debris at the bottom of the pond, you can take your net and you can swish it around in the water, run it through the water a couple of times to try and wash out any excess mud. So that's what we're going to do right now. So I give it a couple of scoops through the bottom, and you'll see it's full of debris and stuff, but also little critters. And I'm going to take my scoop full of muck and pond invertebrates, and I'm going to swish it through the water a little bit and try to wash out as much mud as possible. You can see the water running out from my net. It's getting a little bit clearer. All right, and once we've done that a little bit, we're gonna take this net full of stuff and we're gonna dump it in our bin. And it's as easy as that. So having a look in our bin, at first it doesn't look like there's much, but once you do it a couple times and then you wait for the mud to settle and you start looking a little harder, you might notice there's tons of little things moving around, swimming around. So this bin is now actually full of life, all these tiny little critters that you can see. So definitely something that you want to keep an eye out for. Of course though, sometimes it takes a couple of scoops to get as many things as possible, or maybe specific things that you're looking for. So what we've done before we start filming is we actually took a bucket and we skipped through all the scooping for you guys. We pre-scooped a bin full of good stuff and critters. So why don't we actually go to our pre-scoop bin and show you some of the things that we found right here at this pond. And there's a lot of critters to be seen here. All right, so we just take a look at this bin here. There's lots of different things moving around, but I think one of definitely the highlights of the things that I see in this bin are these guys right here. So there's one here, and there's one here, and there's another one here beside the snail. They're weird looking. Yeah, so at first they look like just kind of a bundle of sticks, but I promise you that there is actually an animal living inside there. So that's actually what we call a Tricotta larvae. And what Tricotta is they grow up to be these flying insects. So they have very hairy wings and they fly around in the air. But before they get to that adult stage, they actually live their life as a larva. So kind of like the baby form of the Tricotta flies, and they live in the water. So what they do is they actually build these elaborate structures, and these elaborate structures, these cases that they build around themselves, serves a couple of different purposes. But we first take a really close look at one of these cases. So it's nice and circular, and the Tricotta larva is actually inside of there. It's a little worm-like creature that lives inside of this case, and it lives inside the water, and it actually uses silk from a gland right at their head to grab little pieces of grass or sticks or sometimes even pebbles, and they grab these little pieces that they deem perfect and they glue it together with a silk, which acts kind of like a double-sided tape to construct this big elaborate case all around its body. And in fact, inside of that case, at the very end of the Tricotta larva, they actually have little pinchers that help hold them in place inside the case so other animals can't pull them out. But these fantastic looking cases serve a couple of different reasons. One of the best reasons is for camouflage. So you can imagine if you found a bundle of sticks like that just at the bottom of a pond, if you were a fish looking for a snack or another animal looking for a snack, you might just pass right over that because that doesn't look like an animal to you. So that helps these larvae blend into the environment a little bit better. So that helps them to not get eaten by predators. It was really, really helpful for that. And different species will build their cases out of different things as well. So we have, it looks like all the same species here, which have built their cases out of these sticks and little pieces of grass maybe, or plant material. But another really, really important reason for them to have this case around them is so they could use it as a breathing case. So you see, Tricotta larvae, what happens is when they first evolved, they really depended on clean flowing water. And this water will flow past their gills so they can breathe. Now, of course, over time, these insects have actually evolved to live in standing pools of water, just like Victoria Woods Pond here. But the trouble with a standing pool of water is there's no source of moving water to push water and then oxygen past their gills. So that's where these cases come into play. Inside this case, right behind their head, these larvae actually have a little hump. And what they'll do is this hump will keep them in place, and behind it, their little body will wiggle up and down just like this inside the case. And what that happens is this wiggling motion, it'll draw water in from the front of the case and then out the back. And this causes causes a constant source of moving water to help them breathe inside their cage. So it's actually pretty ingenious. They're little structures that they made with their very own silk glands. They're little homes they can carry around with them. It helps to protect them from predators by acting as camouflage, and it can also help some species breathe, which is pretty spectacular. Now, of course, another amazing creature that we found here, and lots of them, are all of these snails. So I think they're a big highlight of this bin. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 snails here. There's this one really big guy here. And these aquatic snails, of course, are different species than the snails you find on land. These guys live in water, and it looks like they found a really good home here in Victoria Woods Pond. And they're a really, really awesome animal to take a look at. So if you take a look, we have the shell part. So this shell, they can actually produce to help protect themselves from predators. So if they get spooked, they can pull into the shell, and that offers them some protection from predators. And then they have this fleshy bit coming off from outside of the shell. Oh, I spooked him, so he's gonna go inside his shell to protect himself from me, who is a very big, scary predator, of course. But the big fleshy part that comes outside of the shell, we call this the foot. So this is part of their body, and we call it the snail's foot. And inside of the shell, there's also another squishy part called the mantle. So the mantle is the part of the body which actually secretes and creates the shell all around the snail's body. And this snail is gonna move around on different surfaces, and it's gonna eat different things. So depending on the species, they may eat plant material, they might eat maybe organic material like detritus, so all sorts of different things. And what they're gonna do is they have a really specialized mouth part. They have what we call a radula. That's what they use to feed. And you can imagine it as on the underside of them, they actually have kind of like this conveyor belts full of tiny little teeth that they're gonna use to scrape surfaces that they move on and bring food all the way back to the back of their mouth so they can swallow it down and eat. So that is how they feed, using this radula. It's kind of like this tiny tooth conveyor belt, which is really cool. And both the Tricotta larvae and these snails are a really fantastic thing to see in this pond because they are a good bioindicator, which means they indicate that this pond is doing really well and it's nice and healthy, because both of these animals really depend on healthy, clean ecosystems. They're very sensitive to any sort of pollution. They can't live in polluted waters. And snails, they're very sensitive to the pH of the water. So if the pH of the water changes from different factors like maybe pollution or even climate change, then they may not even be able to survive in the water anymore. So seeing both of these critters around today, and lots of them, is a really good sign that Victoria Woods is doing pretty well. But it's not just snail and tricotta, or caddisfly, you can call them as well, in this bin. There's lots of other cool things too. Like if you have a closer look, we actually have, believe it or not, a very familiar insect in this bin, and that's this guy right here. So you might not know it looking at him, but when he's fully grown, is a very familiar insect. This is the larval form of a dragonfly. We call it a dragonfly nymph. And I know it sounds kind of crazy because he looks like a little alien right now. But these dragonfly nymphs, they actually spend their life in the water. So instead of flying around in the air like the adult form, these alien-like creatures live in the water, and they grow and they grow, and they'll shed, they'll mold their old exoskeleton into bigger instars or bigger forms of their larval stage until they're big enough to grow into adults and to undergo a metamorphosis. And when that happens, they're in little alien bodies, gonna crawl out of the water, gonna grab hold to maybe a stick or a piece of grass, and they're gonna bust out of their old skin, and then out comes this nice, long, elegant, skinny-bodied, winged creature that you usually see zipping around. And dragonflies are one of my personal favorite insects. They're so pretty, and they're amazing predators, but the larval forms, even though they may not look as elegant as their adult forms, they are pretty amazing too. So just like their adult counterpart, the dragonfly nymph is a predator underwater as well. These guys, they have a pretty impressive lower lip. So they use their lower lip, it's called a labium, to catch their prey. What happens is when they're hunting underwater, they're gonna wait for something to come by, something that's just right, maybe another invertebrate, like another little aquatic bug or something like that. And when it gets close enough, they're gonna take their lower jaw and they're gonna pump it full of water. And that lower jaw, now pushed open by hydrostatic force, is gonna pop out, it's gonna grab their prey and it's gonna pull it back in to their mouth, and then they're gonna have themselves a delicious snack. So they have a killer lip. And believe it or not, some of the bigger species, like some darner species, their dragonfly nymphal form, they actually have little pinchers at the end of their lower lip, and they've been known to catch even small vertebrates like tadpoles eat, which is pretty incredible, I think. And they move around underwater. They have these little legs that they can crawl around with. But that's not the only way to move around. So they, inside their rectum, it's where they hold their gills, so they breathe through the butt. That's a fun fact. But they can actually jet water out of their butt as well, and that will push them and propel them along underwater, and it helps them move a little faster if they need to. So that's pretty cool. A little dragonfly, two little dragonfly nymphs. So there's one here, and there's one over here. And I can't wait for them to merge as adults maybe later in the summer. But there's other things too. I know I saw another predator in here lurking around. I do love the predators. I have a soft spot for them. Where did he go? Let's see if we can find him. There's lots of things in this bin right now, so sometimes the things we want to look for get lost. Oh, special feature, we do have a little fingernail clam here, and we can find that on our biodiversity sheet as well. So fingernail clam right over here. So it's very, very small, but he's right over here. That's neat. Oh, so here's the guy I was looking for. He's doing a good job of hiding. But this is a predaceous diving beetle. And he's called a predaceous diving beetle because he is an amazing predator. So he has these big mandibles, and when he's hunting, he's gonna pierce his prey with the mandibles, and they're hollow. So they deliver digestive juices into his prey to start digesting his prey so he can suck it up and eat it. So that's pretty awesome. These guys are pretty cool little creatures. And you might notice when he swims, you might notice a little flash of silver underneath his body. And that's because these guys, instead of breathing through gills, they breathe air. But being an aquatic creature, that's kind of hard to do. So what he does is he carries a little bubble of air underneath his body, and he uses that as basically a little scuba tank for breathing. So that's why when he moves every now and then, you see a little flash of silver underneath his body. That's actually his little scuba tank. And there's a lot of other little critters swimming around here as well. So all these tiny little things swimming around. You might notice that they are also carrying little bubbles of air as well. And those guys, a lot of them are backswimmers. They're called backswimmers because they swim in the back. I love a well-named insect. But these guys also use that as a bit of a breathing apparatus, a little scuba tank for them to live in the water. It's kind of neat. And you know what? There's a ton of invertebrates here, but big ponds like this, they also feature some vertebrate animals as well. And we actually found a nice little vertebrate that we want you guys to meet. We kept him separate so he doesn't run away before we're ready to meet him. But I think he's getting a little impatient. So why don't we introduce him so we can let him go back to his normal day life before disrupting him too much. So here he is. So I don't know if you guys can see him, but this sweet little guy is a wood frog. And you can tell he's a wood frog because he has that kind of dark band of color, that mask over his eyes. And that's a pretty good diagnostic feature for these guys. But they're an amazing native amphibian that we have. And I think one of the coolest things about them is not what they're doing right now, you know, being active in the summer, but what they do in the winter. Because these guys live in the water, you can imagine, that gets pretty tough here in Canada in the winter. It gets very cold and a lot of things freeze over. But these guys actually have a very special strategy to survive the winter. They can actually freeze solid. And that sounds crazy because, you know, if you take a human and you freeze them solid, they're not really gonna do so hot. What happens is as tissue freezes, all the liquid inside the cells form ice crystals that then burst through and cut through the cell membranes, destroying tissue. And that's what ends up killing an organism normally that freezes solid. But certain organisms, like wood fox, they've adapted a trick around this. See, as the temperatures start to drop and these guys prepare for the winter, they start producing a whole bunch of sugars. They pack their cells full of these sugars, and it basically acts as a natural antifreeze. It prevents the water inside the cell from forming these ice crystals. So as they freeze in the winter, their tissues aren't damaged and they can survive that. And in springtime, when things start wearing up, these guys come out, they thaw out, and they become active again. So they actually can survive freezing solid for the winter. And I think that's pretty amazing. So he's a pretty neat little guy that we found in our pond as well. And just like the snails and the Tricotta or caddisfly, you know, amphibians like frogs are such a sensitive group of animals. They have permeable skin, so any pollutants of water will get into their system and be pretty harmful to them. So being able to find lots of amphibians in the body of water is a really good indicator that the system is doing nice and well and it's good and healthy. So we always love to see little guys like this. Not only are they adorable, but it's a good sign that our ponds are doing well. Now I know he's getting a little impatient in there, so we'll move on to the last step of a pond study. Always remember, when you finish a pond study, the best thing you can do is to let these critters go. So we're gonna let him go back into the water. All right, little buddy. There you go. And he's just hopping away there. All right, so definitely those are all the critters we found today. Another thing you can keep an eye out for in water systems like this is crayfish. I know this event normally is a crayfish event. Unfortunately, here at the Arboretum, we don't have a ton of crayfish, but it is something you can see here and there, and definitely in other water systems you may find more of them, and they're a pretty cool little critter to find around. Crayfish are one of the large invertebrates native to Ontario that you find in our water systems.
And we do find them here occasionally, but we do have them on our biodiversity sheet as well.
Let me show you a picture of what they look like. So that's what they look like, a tiny little crustacean. And they're amazing little critters. They'll swim around, they'll eat all sorts of things. Some species might eat detritus and plant matter. Some species may eat kind of decaying organic matter, like maybe dead animals. So it depends on the species, and you can find them in all sorts of habitats as well. Some will live fully aquatic, some may burrow into ground and form little chimneys in the dirt made out of mud balls. So if you ever see those by the edge of a pond and you're wondering what they are, they're made by crayfish, which is kind of neat. And there's a couple things that threaten them as well. You know, being an aquatic creature, they're pretty sensitive to pollutants. So unhealthy water systems and climate change that maybe raise the acidity of water systems can be a big problem with them. They also face issues with invasive species. So not only do we have native crayfish, but we also have an invasive species of crayfish that can kind of crowd out native species, outcompete them for food and space. So that's something to be aware of as well. Now, that kind of brings us to the end of our little pond study. Of course, there's so many things to see, so many animals and so many plants. So definitely, if you're out and about, have a look at your native or your local water system and have a good look at what's around, the critters living inside them, and think about the impact we can have on them, both bad with pollution and climate change and things we want to avoid, but also good impacts we can have on them as well. Things like not littering, limiting our water use, watching our fertilizer and pesticide use to prevent pollutants getting to water. Those are all amazing things we can do right at home to help keep our water systems nice and healthy. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and a big thank you to the 2Rivers Festival for hosting this event. All right, so that brings us to the end of our little virtual pond study. Definitely, if anybody has any questions, feel free to take yourself off mute and you can ask them and we'll do our best to answer them, or you can send them through the chat, whichever you find easiest.
No questions, but thank you for the great presentation.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for coming.
All right, take care.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you so much, Jenny and Kitty. That was really cool.
And no worries.
Very
Thank you
welcome.
for hosting this event.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye.